Coming up next, a rock icon delves into his own feelings of angst, grappling with the pressures of being a celebrity put on a pedestal and confronting the reality that he's not who he appears to be. It all started when this rock legend was tempted by a beautiful fan backstage after a live performance. And of course, being a famous rock star, we know how this story ends. But in actuality, he resisted this girl's advances. Instead, he returned to his hotel room where he channeled his emotions into writing a song about the struggles of being a public figure. In a moment of clarity, he realized he wasn't the person everyone thought that he was. It became one of the most beloved songs ever, with one of the most poignant vocals of the 70s. And there's a reason why it was so heartfelt, this vocal. The famous singer who did it, his dog died hours before he put down the vocal. We go behind the artifice to uncover what it's really like to be the bad man. Coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember this commercial.
Pepper's tootin' pepper. Mama the pepper man. Would you like to be a pepper too?
You're gonna dig this channel of deep musical nostalgia. Make sure to subscribe below right now. We also have a Patreon where you can find more content. And also, when you have a chance, check out our merch below. We have our Professor of Rock logo shirt. We also have our song Save Us. So it's time for another edition of our series, The New Standards, the show that takes an in-depth look into songs that transcend genre, decades, and fads. Songs that are landmarks in our culture and within our society. You know, they call those songs from the Gershwins, Cole Porter, and Hoagie Carmichael era, they call them standards. Well, these are the modern standards. So I got a question for you. Can you find sympathy for a man who lies and cheats his way through life? Does he deserve compassion when he recognizes his mistakes? These are the questions of self-reflection that Pete Townsend asked himself when he composed Behind Blue Eyes.
Behind blue eyes.
Behind Blue Eyes, the Who's 70s standard truly soothes the ears and captures the heart. Behind Blue Eyes was recorded in 1971, and it featured the talents of all four original members of The Who. There was the song's author, Pete Townsend, on acoustic and electric guitar and backing vocals. Of course, Roger Daltrey on lead vocal, John Entwistle on bass and backing vocal, and Keith Moon on the drums. Now, although it's true both Pete and Roger have blue eyes, Behind Blue Eyes isn't purely autobiographical. Here's the thing, Pete Townsend wrote it to convey how lonely it is to be powerful. The song was inspired by a run-in with a groupie, of all things. Unlike many rock stars, Pete Townsend avoided groupies and remained faithful to his wife after they were married in 1968. However, after the Who's concert, the Tommy concert on June 9, 1970 in Denver, Colorado, Pete Townsend was tempted to the limit by a particularly beautiful groupie. Instead of succumbing to the desire, he actually returned to his hotel room all alone. As a devout follower of spiritual leader Meher Baba, Pete stayed true to one of the cardinal teachings of his guru, and he exercised self-control. Pete retreated to his room and he wrote what he called a prayer. It began with the line, "When my fist clenches, crack it open." In that moment, the spark from Behind Blue Eyes was ignited.
When my fist clenches, crack it open before I use.
The wild bridge of Behind Blue Eyes, it burst forward with Pete's foundational lyrics. "When my fist clenches, crack it open before I use it and lose my cool. When I smile, tell me some bad news before I laugh and act like a fool."
Some bad news before I laugh and act like a fool.
It's as if Pete was begging someone to restrain him from giving in to his core desires. Now, the next line underscores that point. "And if I swallow anything evil, put your finger down my throat." To cleanse his conscience and sanctify his soul, the temptation had to be completely rejected. Once again, Pete Townsend obeyed the gospel of Baba.
Evil, put your finger down my throat.
Pete Townsend originally wrote Behind Blue Eyes for a character in his Lifehouse project. It was for a villain named Jumbo, but then Pete changed the song's principle to Brick, a hacker who infiltrates the government's mainframe, known as the Grid in this, to inform people of Lifehouse, a massive rock and roll festival that will liberate attendees from their formed hibernation, with a universal chord that resonates with each individual's harmonic frequency. Jumbo is Brick's arch nemesis. He is the overbearing controller of the grid who leads his security forces to close down Lifehouse. It's kind of a cool thing.
I do, and I blame you.
Now, we've covered it briefly before, but Lifehouse was way ahead of its time. It was actually intended to be a film similar to The Who's Tommy and Quadrophenia. Pete Townsend envisioned a futuristic fantasy where people were driven indoors by a climatic catastrophe and a tyrannical government that stripped away all forms of recreation, including religion and music. In this dystopian world, people were kept pacified through artificial reality, experiences delivered via intravenous tubes. The people lived as if they were on a show on TV. Everything was programmed. That's what Townsend said about it. Doesn't sound anything like today. It's purely science fiction, right? The villains of this dark, domineering world were those who provided the intravenous entertainment, while the heroes were the savages who had preserved rock and roll as a primal force and had retreated to the woods to live with it. Pete had ambitious plans for Lifehouse. His plan was for it to be a double album. It was going to be a movie. It was also going to be an immersive live experience with an elaborate narrative. Pete's vision was truly, truly ahead of its time. Although Townsend never completed the Lifehouse project, the songs he meant to include in the film, they ended up on the album Who's Next, including a few of the band's greatest tracks, Bob O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again. It was intended to be the closing number for the Lifehouse production. Like most of Townsend's compositions for The Who, the genesis of Behind Blue Eyes, that was found on a demo recorded in Pete's home studio. Pete actually recalled that his wife heard the song from the kitchen below, it was below the studio, and she was really moved by what she heard. After Pete finished the harmony vocals for the demo, she told her husband she thought the song was absolutely beautiful. Now, of course, Pete was happy about his wife's glowing critique, but he felt he had to clarify the meaning of the song to her. He revealed that despite the gentle acoustic finger picking and, the wistful vocal, the song wasn't meant to be pretty, per se. The subject matter of the song was actually pretty bleak. It was about a man who was treacherous. He lied to and cheated those around him until he faced his just punishment. The opening verse of Behind Blue Eyes puts us into the villain's mind. He knows he's a bad man, but he's also a sad man, because of what his life has become. The life of a hated, shunned man. He asks for some kind of empathy, even though he's unrepentant. No one knows what it's like to be hated, faded, telling only lies. It's just, again, jukebox poetry.
Faded to telling only lies.
Wow. Pete Townsend went deep into the psyche of the man that he wrote about in Behind Blue Eyes. He realizes the monster that he has become, admitting that he is a selfish creature that's only capable of feeling anger. Ironically, he doesn't want to be who he is, but he's not strong enough to change. The telling line in Pete's narrative is in the song's chorus. My love is vengeance that's never free. And the character gets off on hate and revenge, even though he knows that it makes him the bad man.
My love is vengeance.
In truth, there are many parallels between Townsend's life at the time and that of the fictional Brick. The talks of temptations and the resulting frustration mirrors what Townsend likely felt when he returned to his hotel room after resisting the advances of a beautiful woman. I mean, Pete admitted that Behind Blue Eyes expressed his own feeling of angst, that no one knows what it's like to be Pete Townsend, with high expectations and the pressure to be someone that maybe he just isn't. It's not meant to be a facade where he is intentionally duping the public. It's more like, an actor playing a part, not only on stage, but in real life. In March 1971, the early sessions for the Lifehouse songs began at the record plant in New York. Pete Townsend recorded a version of Behind Blue Eyes featuring Al Kooper from Blood, Sweat, and Tears. He was on organ. But these initial takes didn't quite hit the mark. Undeterred, though, Pete took the tapes to the legendary producer Glyn Johns, known for his work with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. Although Johns found the concept of Lifehouse, he found it a little baffling, a little confusing. But he was impressed by the raw power of the songs in this. He suggested a new direction for it. Let's go in and make an album. That's what he proposed. He said, these songs are strong enough on their own without needing a storyline to back them up at all. Glyn Johns had a transformative idea for Pete Townsend's project. Instead of clinging to the ambitious Lifehouse concept, Glyn Johns proposed something simpler, yet really bold. His idea was to focus on the strongest tracks, strip away the context and present them as a standalone studio album. He also suggested starting fresh, scrapping the New York recordings and just redoing everything from scratch. So in April of 1971, The Who moved their recording sessions to Olympic Studios in Barnes. From the very first session, the band was struck by the profound sonic movements. Townsend said, every time we went back in, we were astounded at the sounds that he was producing. The studio magic that Glyn Johns brought to the table transformed the project into something truly remarkable. The best I ever had. Speaking of remarkable, we gotta talk about the inspired lead vocal on Behind Blue Eyes by the great Roger Daltrey. Man. When it was time to record Behind Blue Eyes, Roger Daltrey was ready to channel its deep emotional intensity. That very day, he had faced a personal tragedy of his own. It made the song's sentiments all too real. Roger would say, and I quote, "My dog got run over and was killed. I was desperately trying to hold it together in the studio." Apparently, it was the first dog that Roger ever had. He loved that dog dearly. He definitely nailed the vocal. What an emotional performance. So lately, Roger Daltrey has been focusing on his solo concerts, all the while waiting to see if Pete Townsend will be ready to hit the road ever again. Roger mentioned that he doesn't practice much these days. Now, his voice went through a tough patch in the late 90s and early 2000s due to a scare with potential vocal cord cancer, but he managed to overcome it. Going back to the recording studio during the vocal sessions for Behind Blue Eyes in '71, Roger delivered arguably his finest vocal. He poured the grief he felt from the loss of his beloved pet into the performance, and the song took on an even more poignant edge, capturing the raw emotion of Roger's wounding heartache. It's just exceptional. Roger's deep grief gives his vocal an authentic emotional depth that far surpasses Downs' original demo. As Townsend's minor chords and John Entwistle's subtle bass lines create a haunting backdrop, Daltrey's affecting delivery lays bare the character's fragile state of mind. Seems to be. With a raw plea, he sings, "But my dreams, they aren't as empty as my conscience seems to be." Behind Blue Eyes evolves into an anthemic rocker, with that amazing bridge that bolts into a Who jam session. As my conscience seems to be. With defiant bravado, Roger projects the narcissistic contempt of this song's chief character. "When I smile, tell me some bad news. Before I laugh and act like a fool. And if I swallow anything evil, put your finger down my throat. And if I shiver, please give me a blanket. Keep me warm. Let me wear your coat." When Who's Next dropped in August of '71, its immediate critical acclaim and commercial success made it clear that ditching Lifehouse, it was probably the right call. To this day, it's one of the greatest rock albums of all time. I mean, you got the Middle Finger, Truth Bomb, the Big Gov, I Won't Get Fooled Again, which arguably has the greatest scream ever on a rock song. Of course, you got Bob O'Reilly. This is a song that some call Teenage Wasteland because of the anthemic chorus. It's a song that surprisingly was never released as a single, even though across all platforms it has over 1 billion streams, probably the Who's most popular song. It's so iconic that even its writer Pete Townsend said that when he plays it live, he can't help but look at the crowd as they're singing along and thinking, "I did that. I wrote that song." I remember he said in a famous interview with Rolling Stone back in the day that when he's on his deathbed, he might just embarrass himself and ask someone to pass him his guitar, run the backing tape of Bob O'Reilly so that he can play it just one more time before he meets his maker. I love that. I mean, if The Who had only released Who's Next and nothing else their entire career, they would still be one of the greatest bands ever. There's just no question. Now, Roger Daltrey would say about the album, it turned out to be a truly organic Who album. He recognized the raw passion and the cohesive vision that it conveyed. The record soared to #1 in the UK. It achieved triple platinum status here in the US, where it spent 41 weeks on the charts. It peaked at #4 here. As the second single released from Who's Next, Behind Blue Eyes, it only reached #34 in the US. But man, its legacy has far surpassed its sales numbers and any chart position over the years. Now hailed as a complete masterpiece, Behind Blue Eyes is a powerful and introspective exploration of identity and inner balance. You don't have to see that in the movie to get it. You get it with the songs. It's theater of the mind with what The Who has done here. You can still imagine what the song illustrates without a visual. Its themes of spiritual equilibrium resonate deeply today, reflecting the ongoing global conversation about mental health.
To be the sad man.
For many Who fans who weren't keen on nu metal, Limp Bizkit's 2003 cover of the song was a shocking turn of events. Featured on their album Results May Vary, their version climbed to #18 in the UK and #71 in the US, making it the only cover of the song to chart. The Limp Bizkit, that version appears in the Angry Birds movie. It actually has nearly 200 million views on YouTube alone. The track was also included in the Halle Berry movie Gothica, with Berry making an appearance in the music video, which was directed by Fred Durst from Limp Bizkit.
Behind Blue Eyes.
Pete Townsend's recorded 2 solo versions of Behind Blue Eyes. The original demo of the track is featured on the Scoop album. The original demo version, along with a more recent reworking of the song featuring an orchestra, was on the Lifehouse Chronicles.
Behind Blue Eyes.
Behind Blue Eyes is another monument to the genius lyricism of one Pete Townsend. Also the gripping interpretations of Roger Daltrey, and the riveting musicianship of The Who overall. The storied quartet with 2 fallen heroes, John Entwistle and Keith Moon. I mean, every song that Pete Townsend writes seems to come from a deeply personal and emotional place. And the meanings of his songs in turn connect with us on a very personal level, for sure. In the case of Behind Blue Eyes, one of Pete's most incisive compositions, Pete had an explanation for the song's enduring power. He said, and I quote, "It seems to resonate as a song about how we deceive ourselves, the ways that we betray our own truths, and how living a lie can be easier than confronting honesty. The hardest thing of all of us is to be truthful with ourselves. Yet we often hide behind our appearances, whether we think we look beautiful or ugly. We use our looks as a shield."
No one knows what it's like to feel these feelings.
I mean, honestly, I know so many people this is their favorite Who song. I've never met a person who doesn't love this masterpiece. It's a beloved classic. Its honesty and vulnerability connects with our souls. I mean, it probably hits a little too close to home for some. Most would probably never admit it unless one is ready to take some serious self-reflection and truly change. And that's why Pete Townsend's work has always resonated with us. It's truth. To reinforce the astute musings of Pete Townsend, I'm going to paraphrase the opening line of Behind Blue Eyes to add to my own conclusion of this. No one knows what it's like to be you. No one knows how it feels to be you unless you allow them to get behind those eyes.
Behind Blue Eyes.
Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about The Who and Behind Blue Eyes and Who's Next. Let's have a great discussion about this album. Won't Get Fooled Again, Bob O'Reilly, Behind Blue Eyes. I don't know if you could find an album that has 3 better tracks than these 3. Let's talk about that. Albums that have 3 great tracks and stack them against one another, and let's celebrate The Who for who they truly are, truth tellers. We invite you to subscribe. Love to have you. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.